everyone. I'm Samira, the host of the podcast, The Patient from Hell. I have an incredible guest with us today. And despite us having about 30 minutes of, technical craziness, we made it. And I'm so glad we made it. Jill, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Jill, let's start with a personal story. Do you mind telling us how you ended up in the world of oncology?
So I'm a healthcare provider. I'm a pharmacist by training. So oncology was always something I knew about, learned about, but it became personal like probably a lot of other people, um, cancer hits your family. And my first experience with it was many, many years ago, about 25 years ago, when my 30-year-old sister was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia. And she was living in Virginia at the time. And my mother had gone to go to a surgery that they thought they were removing an ovarian cyst. And she called me with the blood work that they do pre-surgery. And I can't remember the numbers now, but I knew that her numbers were way too low. And I said, uh-oh, something's going on. So through many more diagnostic tests, they determined that she had acute lymphocytic leukemia, told her that she was almost 100% blast cells and to go home and prepare to die, that she had a few months left. Um, Fortunately for all of us, that's not how it turned out. That's a whole other long story. But then after that, my in-laws had cancer, prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer. So it was sort of getting closer and closer. And my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. My husband, when my son was 1 year old, was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of prostate cancer and told he had 5 years to live at best case. About 3 years after that, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And mine, we'll probably talk about it, was my prognosis was nowhere near as dire as my sister's or my husband's. And anyway, so that's kind of how it all started, I guess. You could say we have bad protoplasm, but that's sort of how it became a very personal cause for me, not just professional.
Jill, I've met a lot of cancer patients and families. I don't think I've met anybody who's had to deal with it on four fronts.
Yeah.
Yourself, your spouse, your sister, your mom.
Yep.
That feels, even in the world of oncology, it feels like a lot. Before we dive in, how did you get through all of that?
Um, I don't really know that I have a good answer for that. A lot of it was when it started, naivety, not really understanding the gravity of the situation. Certainly not with my sister. When she was diagnosed, when she was given the very poor prognosis, she did come home to my hometown of Nebraska. And we got her into the University of Nebraska Medical Center, where her physician said, I want to repeat all the tests. I'll give you a second opinion. His opinion, thankfully, was very different and said, I think we can treat this. And so the hope, the optimism is what gets you through it, I think, back then, not really understanding what we were facing or the journey that she was embarking on. And so then when my mom was diagnosed, we're kind of a steely Midwest family. And it was just another journey we were on. Then with my husband, then with myself. I think with myself, it was a little bit different because When my husband was diagnosed, I had been in this position before of having a family member go through this journey. So to me, I just looked at it like, here we go again. This is another journey we're on. We'll get through it, past it, whatever you think. When I was diagnosed, I was 44 and I had a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. And that's when it hit me that these babies could lose both their parents. Sorry for the emotion, but that was the punch for me at the time. So, when you say how do you get through it, it's having a strong community, having hope, having healthcare providers that give you that hope. And then it's just one step at a time.
Um, hmm. I guess I have a few questions for you because the word naivety struck me because you open with you're a pharmacist.
Yeah.
How do you balance that? How do you balance being a pharmacist, a professional in the space, and then feeling naive almost when you are a caregiver and then your own diagnosis?
Yeah, so I think it's compartmentalization. I think healthcare providers are masters of that. I saw it with my own parents. My dad's a pharmacist, my mother is a nurse. And so while you study the science in school and you have the privilege of treating patients, it's just not personal. You're committed to their outcomes. You're committed to their success. You're committed to providing the best care you possibly can, but it's not you. And there's so much more that patient is going through that you can't possibly understand, until it is you. And so that's the naivety I guess I'm referencing is I knew drug therapy, I knew diagnoses, I knew care plans, I knew how to provide the best thing I could from my training, uh, but I didn't know how to live it, or how to deal with it in my life, or how to communicate to my children, how to manage a job while having cancer. I didn't know how to do that. So that's I guess, the naive part I'm referencing.
I have a question for you. You said that providers are masters of compartmentalization
Yeah.
and that they get enamored or trained, on the science side, on the outcomes, on the data. My question for you is, can it be personal for them?
Oh,
Or
most
could it be?
certainly. Most certainly. And I think, so it certainly is for me now. Um, I don't know how it is for others if it is initiated by a personal experience and then suddenly it becomes personal. Sometimes that compartmentalization is also comfort, because if you take all of that home with you every day, that's very difficult. Um, and so it's a protection mechanism, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. Once you go through it yourself, whether it's you or your family member or somebody very close to you, you learn a lot more about it, and it's much harder to compartmentalize, because you've lived it. It's your lived experience as well. So it becomes a lot muddier. And I think with age and way more experiences in life, it just gets a little muddier as you go. And you get more experience as you go. So you learn more from your patients, and your own life, and then they become so intertwined. Compartmentalization is much more difficult.
I was reflecting on you being a three-time caregiver before you become a patient. And one of the things, you know me and you know the team and you know the work we do. One of the things we spend actually a lot of time thinking about is the specific relationship between the caregiver and the patient. And for you, it's been sibling, daughter, and then spouse. And my question for you is, from your lens, what are some differences you found yourself navigating in those three fairly different roles?
That's a great question. As a sibling, I come from a family of 5 kids. And when my sister was diagnosed, a couple of us were healthcare providers, and my parents were. The sister that was diagnosed with cancer was not. And so we took it upon ourselves to surround her with, our opinions and our advice. Your podcast titled "The Patient from Hell," I'm sure somewhere in her chart, probably multiple times, is documented the family from hell. Um, I remember when she had her first visit at University of Nebraska, and all of us piled in because we had the questions to ask. And I think we were a little overwhelming to our healthcare providers staff at the time. And then I will say, she needed a stem cell transplant. They decided would be her best course of therapy. And we were anxiously lining up to be tested, hoping to be the lucky one that could donate our stem cells. And it was me. I was so excited. And we kind of laugh in our family. 2 of us look very much alike. Another 2 look very much alike. And then there's my brother. And and the sister that had cancer is not my clone, as we used to refer to ourselves. So I really didn't expect to be her match. So was ecstatic when I was. And then to me, it was like, look what I could do for her. Like, I get to be the one to help her out. What a privilege. And it was really from that basis. I didn't live at home. She did move home with my parents. And so they really saw the care and the journey way more than I did. I mean, I was back and forth like my other siblings, but it wasn't upfront and close. So it was really just from we're going to make this a success because this is going to work. And thankfully it did. With my mom, she had breast cancer. I can't even recall what kind it was, if it was even typed back then. This was, almost 20 years ago. And it was a standard course of therapy, chemotherapy, a lumpectomy. She, lost her hair. My children saw the wigs, and they were much younger at the time. They didn't understand it. So we just kind of answered their questions, ask mom how she's doing. She's a steely Midwestern girl, so she gets through it. With my husband, as I mentioned, my youngest, who's now 20, was 1 at the time. And it was another one of these, okay, that's the diagnosis. We didn't really understand the gravity of it until the many healthcare providers that we went to, when they start to say, I'm sorry. That's when it hits you. Wait, what are you sorry for? Why are you sorry? I thought we had a treatment course here, and his treatment course was surgery and then a long, long line of different chemotherapeutic agents. So why are you saying you're sorry? However, I had 2 young children, and so it was sort of kick into the mode of, okay, what do we have to do to keep this family moving and growing and thriving? And at the time, he had surgery. We thought we got it. We didn't necessarily. So he had a 16-year course. Remember, we were told we would have only 5. So we kind of forgot about it. It was acute at the moment, but after surgery and, first line care, we thought, okay, it's just going to be a chronic disease like a lot of prostate cancer is. despite the type that he had that was very aggressive. And we'll manage it like everybody else does. It wasn't until the last few years that it started really roaring back, and a couple of things. He had a complex medical history where he needed a kidney transplant about 4 years before he passed away. And then the immunosuppressants that he was on to prevent graft versus host disease allowed the cancer to come back. And then we were getting to sort of what the armamentarium is of choices for chemotherapy agents, sort of the end of the line. His oncologist, who was fantastic, kept saying, I have more tricks in my bag. I'm getting you from one to the next. The innovation keeps coming. Don't give up. We have the next one. We have the next one. And I was just in sort of, I guess, operations management mode. Keep the house going, keep the kids thriving, keep the husband okay. Your mindset is just different. Keep my job, keep supporting him so he can keep his job. It is, to your point, very different sort of mental models that you are in depending on the role that you're supporting as a caregiver.
And how is that different from the patient, Jill?
From the patient, when I was a patient, after the shock of it, it was sort of like, tell me what I have to do. I'll get through this, let me know what the best opportunity to get through this was. I also had probably enough knowledge to be dangerous. This was 15 years ago, actually. 2 days ago was my 15-year anniversary. And I had enough knowledge to be dangerous, not total knowledge of what I was facing. So I was dependent on the doctors who encouraged me to get multiple opinions, which I did because I wanted to see all the different approaches that could be taken. And I wanted to match that with what I wanted my outcome to be. And maybe it was unrealistic at the time. I hope it's not now that I'm 15 years out. But I wanted zero risk of recurrence, and I wanted all cancer eradicated. No matter what that took, I would do whatever aggressive therapy or regimen or care plan they suggested, but I wanted them to be very aggressive. There were differing opinions on how aggressive I should be. I selected the most aggressive. I did that. I pursued it. I think I'm here 15 years later because of that. So it was sort of a, okay, tell me what I need to do. I'm going to do it. And I might even do more if I could, if I thought that would help. But I wanted control because I felt like I lost control in this diagnosis. I didn't feel like I did anything to get this diagnosis. So I wanted to control everything about it, including the communication of it. I did not want my kids. I worked at a place where they had a daycare provided on site. So a lot of my work colleagues had children that were with my kids in daycare and early years of school, like preschool and kindergarten. I did not want my kids thinking that what they saw happen to my mom was going to happen to me. I didn't want them hearing it from somebody else. And so I thought the best course was to not communicate that I had breast cancer and was fighting that in my workplace. I kept it completely between my husband and I at the time, which turned out to be okay for me. I know it's not that easy for a lot of people. But that's I guess my need for control magnified so significantly more because when you get that diagnosis, you hear those words, you feel a complete loss of control.
What strikes me in hearing you talk, especially about your role as a caregiver and then you getting diagnosed, is it sounds like, especially for your husband, caregiving was also about control, but operational control.
Yeah.
It almost was like a command and control center for, I don't know, emergency response, right? And you basically are like you're kind of focused on it's almost like task oriented
Very.
operationalization. And then as a patient, though, it sounds like control seeps in a little bit maybe deeper. It feels a little bit more, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Existential almost.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. You don't realize that when you're going through it. But yes, it was, I didn't feel like I was controlling my mom's or my sister's or my husband's destiny, but I felt like I needed to control mine.
Huh. Yeah.
And as if I could. I mean, I didn't know if I could or not, but I felt like the decisions I was making were putting me in the position of hopefully being in control of that outcome.
Mm-hmm. No, I very much relate to that. And can I make an analogy? Because there's something else you said about decision making in particular that I'd love to unpack with you. You walked in and said, I want the most aggressive. I'm getting an option set. I do have an option set. I recognize I have an option set, which I'm not super sure patients always recognize, but it sounds like you totally knew you had options. And you also knew the criteria for optimization. And the optimization was happening most aggressive at any cost. And the cost here, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I'm assuming are like quality of life, cost of treatment, navigating treatment, etc. Um, the analogy that I've been thinking about for a while now, and I use it for my own decision making, was, and we don't use this a lot in healthcare, but it's almost like you're managing an investment portfolio. Where when you go into and you talk to a bank or someone who's helping you invest or one of your many thousands of fintech apps now, you walk in and the first thing they do is conservative, risky, aggressive. Where are you on this sort of spectrum? And if we were able to get patients, I think in particular patients, but also family members, to explain their risk level and risk tolerance, I wonder if that would have made the communication around decision making for the care team, medical care team, easier. Because sometimes I feel as if there's a gap between what the patient wants and what the provider is trying to drive to.
Yes.
So, sorry, that was a long-winded analogy.
No, it's a great one. And that gap was very present for me. So my first diagnosis actually and treatment plan was aggressive because my physicians recognized I was young, I had young kids, and the words they were using, this is totally curable, this is treatable, don't worry. Now, these were the same physicians that, through the whole diagnostic process had said, oh, don't worry. Just because you are showing dense breasts doesn't mean you have cancer. 90% of these calcifications are nothing. They're benign. I don't know why I suddenly thought, okay, I'm going with that. But the second opinion that I received was a lot of, I didn't feel like I fit on the epidemiology curve, the normal curve for when breast cancer should occur. And therefore, I didn't feel like I should be treated like the bell curve, like the majority of patients. I was too young. I shouldn't have this. I don't have any of these risk factors. The fact that I'm sitting before you makes me an anomaly. I want to be treated not like everybody else. You should treat me like an anomaly. And the physician actually did not want to do that, wanted to be far more conservative. And I was thinking, like you had said, I want no risk of recurrence because I don't want to keep going through this. I don't want to keep waking up at night worrying that I'm going to keep going through this and what's my biopsy in the next 6 months going to show? And then 6 months from there, and then 6 months from there. Um, and and I wanted no holds barred, do what you need to do, but get it out of me. I don't want it in my head that something is in my body going wrong. And she didn't want to do that. And so I chose the other place to be treated because they were willing to.
There's so much in what you're describing that's similar. It's actually the reason the podcast is called The Patient from Hell. It's tongue-in-cheek aside, though, it's actually named after a book. It's named after a book because there's a professor at Stanford who gets diagnosed many, many years ago with a rarer type of cancer. And he makes the argument that you just made, which is he's an anomaly, and medicine and science is done on cohorts of patients.
Yeah.
There is a bell curve, there's a normal curve. But if your characteristics as a patient don't fit into that cohort, you need to argue for empiric decision making, i.e., decision making based on your individualistic criteria.
Yes.
Because the system is actually not set up for that. The system is set
Right.
up to treat you like a cohort, to treat you like a population. And that's what then causes the need to advocate, the need to push back, the need to question, the need to really know what your options are. And he wrote this book called The Patient from Hell, How to Get the Best That Medicine Has to Offer. I happened to read it first month of diagnosis, and here we are.
And here we are, definitely. It happened that way with my husband as well. He had been through ups and downs of 16 years of therapy. And as I mentioned, the immunosuppressants he was on because of his kidney transplant, which we couldn't have avoided, sort of allowed the cancer to come roaring back. And it was really taking a toll on him because the increased amounts and the potency and strength of the drugs that they were using to combat the cancer were really taking a toll on him. The fatigue, the anorexia, the illness was just wearing him down. And while his oncologist was saying, don't give up, I have more options, he was saying, I'm not sure I'm in for more options. What do I get if I don't do anything? How many more years or months do I get? How does that compare if I do more? Because right now I feel so bad. That extra 6 months might not be worth it. And so to your point, just like your investment portfolio, decisions you make at one point in your life aren't necessarily the same decisions you make at another point in your life. And he'd been in that portfolio making decisions for a lot longer than I had to. And his outlook was changing as his prognosis was changing and as his quality of life was changing. So, I agree with you that maybe they should, upon presentation, sort of say, hey, here's a risk profile. What are you interested in? But then keep checking because through every course, those decisions can change.
Yes, yes, I fully agree. Yes. There was something that I think I just understood. So your husband is diagnosed going through for 16 years, and then your diagnosis happens when your kids are 5 and 7, which means that you were wearing both hats at the same time, right?
Yes. So he was 6 years older than me. And he was diagnosed first, and then a few years after he was diagnosed, I was diagnosed. But at the time I was diagnosed, strangely, his was fairly under control. He had had the surgery. He was getting hormone therapy post-surgery. Things seemed to be okay, monitoring PSA. You know, if it would creep up, they'd add another agent or tweak it, it would go back down. So we weren't as focused. We weren't dealing with it both at the same time, even though we both had cancer at the same time.
I appreciate that because that feels that's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. It's probably why I got emotional at the beginning, because that's when it sort of hit me, is not necessarily all about me, but um about our kids. Oh my gosh, are you kidding? Both parents? What's going to happen to them? And now I worry for that for a different reason, right? They have this protoplasm from their parents and their parents' parents. And so, you know, a whole different level of worry.
How did you end up in pharma companies? Because I think that's the professional. That was a hard one. Sorry. I was like, there's no gentle way of making that.
No. So I ended up in pharmacy. I'll start that first. Kind of funny. We still laugh about it. In high school, my college advisor, you know, those tests, those aptitude tests you take, kind of tell them where they should advise you. I'll never forget. She said to me, whatever you do, do not pick a career that involves math or science. So me being a Taurus, a full-blooded Taurus, said, well, then pharmacy it is. I'm picking a career that involves both math and science. And like a good pharmacy student, I adored and idolized my faculty, my teachers. And so I wanted to go into clinical practice and academia, just like they did, and did for a few years. But then got recruited into a pharmaceutical company that said, hey, you can do what you're doing for students, but on with healthcare providers in terms of medical education, et cetera, and they're providing direct patient care. Now, what you don't get is the direct patient care, right? You do this through the learned intermediary now. You are not that anymore. But think of the magnitude of impact you can have now versus what you're having as a clinician or academician. And then when I took the job and got to meet the people who were publishing the literature that I was learning from, I thought, wow, does it get any better than this? I am actually sitting in front of Dr. You name it, and they're telling me directly about the stuff regarding this publication that's not in the publication. So I'm learning way more than I ever could have learned doing it the way I was doing it, the old-fashioned way. Now, remember, there wasn't internet, and I don't want to age myself or anything like that, but we didn't have all of these cool tools that now allow you to know a whole world's worth of information. Um, as I progress through pharma, it just gets more and more interesting. The opportunities, the things you can learn that are different than I thought I could learn as a clinician or an academician. And so that's kind of how it has all evolved. How it's gotten to now also involving oncology, right? I get the chance to bring my lived experience, as I've learned that it's called. I didn't know the terminology for that before, but the experience that you bring as a patient, as a healthcare provider, and as a caregiver, you get to actually use that to impact the outcomes of patients at a far greater magnitude than you ever would have if you weren't necessarily in industry. So, to me, I feel privileged. I feel honored. I mean, it's a fabulous opportunity, and that's why I am way back, 30 years in pharma now. Again, don't want to age myself, but and it's been a joyous ride the entire time.
That's awesome. Can you help us with a couple of one-on-one things with pharma?
Sure.
I think you'd probably be our first or second, maybe second guest, second or third actually. On the pharma side, we haven't had too many people who work at pharma, so uh, just some basics on how pharmaceutical companies are set up. So a little bit about commercial versus medical affairs versus R&D would be really helpful. That's one question, and then I have a couple more.
Okay. So I've been in the medical affairs part of the organization for the entire 30 years. Um, Pharmaceutical companies have commercial components because somebody has to, well, let me back it up. Let me back it up a little bit more. Pharmaceutical companies are designed to discover, develop, and distribute medications, innovative therapies, not all medications, but I'll just use that as an example to the patients who need them for the diseases that they're targeting. The commercial side of the pharmaceutical company is responsible for promoting, educating, putting out all of the patient access vehicles or tools so that patients know about these products, healthcare providers know about these products, and they can make informed decisions whether or not to use these products in their patients. The R&D side, the R stands for research, D stands for development. The difference between the two is research is the early discovery part of pharmaceutical product development. So they're the ones testing thousands and thousands of different molecules to see which ones will actually interact with the drug targets that will affect the disease state for the positive, with the least amount of adverse events in a biological being, animals to begin with, and then, of course, humans. The development side of that is once it gets into humans, then there's a number of phases of the development cycle that the scientists there design clinical trials to first test the product in healthy volunteers to see what the adverse event profile is. This is after all the toxicity studies have been done, so you're sure it's not going to kill a healthy volunteer, right? And then test the product in the disease state, patients with the disease state. That development process happens it continues to happen as long as that product's on the market. So the development part of the organization will do all of that clinical testing until they file the application with health authorities across the globe, but for the US, it's the FDA. And the health authorities can either approve the product or not, or require more testing, or whatever their decision is. After all of that, medical affairs will take that information used in the clinical development program and help healthcare providers and patients, again, understand how best to use it. However, in medical affairs, they also understand the real life patients in the real world don't necessarily mirror exactly the patients that were allowed in the clinical trials. The clinical trials are designed to show a difference between the medication you're testing and what's currently available to treat it. Or if there's nothing currently available, just to show an effect of the medication you're treating. In order to do that as clearly and cleanly as possible, you have to exclude a lot of patients that might have other disease states or other things that would affect how that drug acts in them in order to show the effect so that the health authorities can decide whether it's safe, whether it's effective, etc. Once then they approve that, then all these other patients that are interested in the product and eligible for treatment. They have the disease state, but let's say they have other complicating disease states. They might have heart disease on top of it. They might have lung disease. They might have a history of cancer, even if it's not a chemotherapeutic agent. all these other things that we know as life and as the general population, the development continues through the medical affairs organization, in addition to the medical education and patient education and tool development of how do we help you use this product more effectively? How do we help you monitor your disease more effectively? Things like that.
Thank you. That was super, super helpful. I have a couple of specific questions for you. Okay. The first is patient centricity. It's my favorite word. I have so many opinions on it.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold back you. Yes. I'd love for you to talk about what is that and how do you really feel about that word?
So I guess in the very objective terminology, patient centricity is putting the patient at the center of what you do. It's become sort of a buzzword and maybe misused, I would say, when you ask me how I feel about it. Because while patients are, of course, at the center of healthcare, and of course, at the center of what we are trying to optimize, their outcomes, sometimes the healthcare industry doesn't feel so patient-centric when you're the patient. Um, and so it's kind of a misnomer at the same time. You know, of course, it's about the patient because that's who you're treating in the healthcare industry. But sometimes it might not feel like that. And that can range from, are you treating my lab level? Are you treating my diagnosis, like the example we were talking about with breast cancer? Or are you treating Jill Massey, who is an individual with a whole complex, story around me with needs that are different than other people's needs? And how are you altering that treatment plan according to what I need versus what the person sitting next to me, and it might be my sister or my mom, what they need, but I can guarantee you is going to be very different. And how then, pharmaceutical industry, do we allow that sort of individualization, personalization, but at scale, in a way that creates access for all? I get to work for a company that its vision is creating a healthier world for all people, not just people like Jill that had access to great care and even a second opinion, but people that might not have access to water. How are you going to give them therapy when they have nothing to swallow the pill with or even survive with? And that's what we hope to mean by patient centricity. I don't think necessarily everybody does mean that by patient centricity, so it's a loaded term.
Something struck me, Joel. I thank you for that explanation. I think it's really, really, really well put. But something struck me, which is when you were describing the drug development process that starts from research, it is by design, and I think necessarily needs to be very scientific.
Yes.
Right? And the R&D process as a whole needs to be very scientific. Clinical trials, you could argue, clinical trials are somewhere in the, like, you start straddling the world a little bit, but even in a clinical trial to demonstrate efficacy, to demonstrate effectiveness, and to meet the bar set by the regulators, the trial themselves do need to be largely, if not entirely, objective. I put that in quotes because, of course, there's nuance.
Yes. As much as possible. Absolutely.
But then when we talk about the implementation side of it, when we talk about the drug has now come to the market, the drug has been born out of an objective process. But yet and it has been born and designed to treat a lab value. It has been designed to treat a disease. It has not been designed to treat Jill Massey or Samira. And
right.
There is this sort of transition that happens, I'm assuming, where because it hasn't been designed that way, now this drug exists in the world designed to treat a lab value disease and is being used to treat individuals. So it just struck me that there is actually a almost flaw is not the right word, but there's almost a missing piece of the process.
I think there was a missing piece of the process. I think that has evolved over time, thankfully, because of our awareness of the genetic code, for example, that makes individuals so different and makes their responses to medications very different. So it's not treating a lab value anymore. It may feel like that. But noticeably, wait, how come given the same drug and at the outset, the same population responds differently? What is going on? And as our science gets better and better, you now can explain that. So then that translates to, oh, how do I get those types of patients and those types of patients and those types of patients in my study so I can see those differences and I can come out with a better designed product that does treat the individual. Now, are we there yet? Are we at utopia yet? Of course not. We're still trying to do that. And our health authorities are cooperating with that, thankfully, right? But it takes a long time to evolve to personalized clinical trials, not just personalized drug therapy after the product is already on the market. So hopefully medical affairs will have less to do in the future where we say, no, see all these different types of patients were included. So all of these studies we have to do after the fact, we don't necessarily have to do. We already know that. That doesn't make for a very efficient drug development process up front, but one day, maybe.
Can you actually, I realize we never said that, just give us the industry average. How long on average to go from bench to bedside and roughly what cost?
Oh, geez. I think the latest estimates out there, it's about 15 years to go from discovery to market. And the range really, and that of course depends on the type of product you're talking about. Are you talking about a small molecule, a biologic, something different? And the disease state you're trying to treat. Is it a rare disease? So it's hard to find a patient population big enough to test the product on. Is it a complex disease, etc.? And the price also, the cost of that has the same variables. But I would say it's anywhere from 1 to 5 billion investment to get a product to the market.
Okay, so I'm going to start wrapping this up. So I'm looking at the clock, and not surprisingly, you and I can talk for hours. So I have 3 general wrap-up questions for you. The first one is, what do you wish patients know about pharma companies?
Oh, I wish patients would know that we have a lot of resources to help them understand the journey that they're on and make informed decisions to activate their participation in their own healthcare. A lot of times, I certainly did not know where to look. I did not know what to expect. I sort of took it, as I mentioned, when I was a patient, one step at a time, or made decisions based on what the physicians were telling us. For any of the cancer incidences, I guess, for lack of a better word, that I've experienced. And there's a lot of resources out there from patient advocacy organizations or from pharmaceutical companies developing products in those disease states that patients can use. At the same time, you know, it I think something that always comes up to us is what kind of trials do you have that I could enroll in? And it's always a difficult position to be explaining to somebody who may not have other options why they can't be in a trial with a product that is looking at that product for your disease state. And it's because we're trying to determine at that stage if the product actually works and is safe. And there may be complications that a patient has that wouldn't allow for that to happen.
Okay, my next question for you is, what is the biggest piece of advice you would give a newly diagnosed breast cancer patient today?
Educate yourself. Um, I would say, even though my information that I remember my physician telling me when she called me and said, this is the kind of cancer you have, don't Google it. That's the first thing she said. That's the first thing I did. And I wish I had asked the question differently when I Googled it. I was looking for what is this and what do I have and what's going to happen to me. I wish I would have said, where should I look for information on this? Who could help me, where learned about it a different way. Um, and I wish I had seen all the different types of resources again that are now much more available for patients and their families, an important piece of it to access on this journey. Even though you may be keeping your journey very private to yourself, it's not private for your family. There's caregivers around you that are as impacted as the patient.
That was going to be my next question. What is your biggest piece of advice for a new caregiver caring for someone with cancer?
Educate yourself. Same first step. Have as much of a candid conversation as possible with that patient to find out what that patient wants, and have it often. What a patient may say at the beginning may change as the disease state evolves or as life circumstances evolve. The patient is likely a bit in shock to begin with and hearing one out of every 50 words. So I would say keep the conversation going. It's okay to talk about that. It's okay to acknowledge what physicians or healthcare providers have said to that patient. It's okay to acknowledge what the patient feels, even though it might be something different than you think should happen or can feel with regard to that, but have the conversation, and not once.
Thank you. All right. Jill, any last thoughts from you?
One last one. I was thinking, how you think about, oh, I wish I'd answered that question differently. The first question you asked me about what you wish patients knew about pharmaceutical industry, it occurred to me after I answered it. Pharmaceutical industry is made with people that are scientists, certainly, but also patients, caregivers, etc. So we're patients like you, people like you, caregivers like you, and we care the same way. We're in this fight just as hard as you are, your families are, and we really want you to know that and know that we're your partner through this journey.
Thank you for sharing that, Jill. I appreciate
You.
Thank you for taking your time. Thank you for dealing with our technical challenges we threw your way. I am super glad we got to do this, and I can't wait to hear more about the next chapter of your life.
Me too. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
This podcast, show notes, and newsletter is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or any materials linked from this blog is at the user's own risk. The opinions of the speakers are their own and do not represent the opinions of organizations they're affiliated with, nor do they reflect the opinions of Mantacares Inc. or Mantacares' sponsors.